The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the small patch of land behind Emma Carter's rented trailer into a swamp of red clay and broken dreams. She stood at the kitchen window, watching sheets of water blur the world outside, her coffee gone cold in her hands. Her daughter Lily slept in the next room, oblivious to the weight pressing down on her mother's shoulders, the eviction notice, the medical bills, the car that wouldn't start without a prayer and a curse. Emma was 32 years old, but felt twice that. Her hands were rough from cleaning other people's houses. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Her back ached from double shifts at the diner, and her eyes carried the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. She had come to this small Georgia town 2 years ago, running from a marriage that had turned violent, and a life that had offered nothing but closed doors. The 5 acres she rented were supposed to be temporary, a place to catch her breath while she figured out what came next. But temporary had stretched into permanence, and now even this threadbare existence was slipping through her fingers. The landowner, Mr. Hutchins, had been patient for months, but patience had limits. 3 months behind on rent, with another payment due in 2 weeks. Emma knew the conversation that was coming. She'd seen it in his eyes the last time he'd stopped by pity mixed with resignation. The look of a man who'd run out of excuses to give. The property itself was barely worth noticing. A sagging trailer that leaked when it rained. A rusted fence that couldn't keep anything in or out. And acres of overgrown brush and Georgia pines that nobody had touched in decades. The previous tenant had abandoned the place 5 years earlier, leaving behind nothing but trash and the ghost of whatever dreams they'd carried here. Emma had tried to make it work, planted a small garden that the deer devoured, fixed what she could with YouTube tutorials and borrowed tools, taught Lily to find beauty in wildflowers and fireflies. But beauty didn't pay bills. And now, with winter coming and her car's transmission making sounds that promised expensive repairs, Emma felt the familiar grip of panic tightening around her chest. She had been poor before, had grown up poor, knew its contours and its cruelties, but this was different. This was poverty with a child depending on her, poverty with no safety net, no family to call, no plan B waiting in the wings. The neighbors, what few there were on this forgotten stretch of rural highway, had their own struggles. Mrs. Chen from the gas station had offered her extra hours, but they'd gone to someone else. The church had helped with groceries twice, but Emma's pride made her throat tight every time she walked through those doors. She wasn't a charity case, she told herself. She was just someone who'd had bad luck, compounded by worse choices, and who was doing her best to claw her way back to stable ground. "Mama," Lily's voice, still, thick with sleep, came from the bedroom doorway. At 7 years old, she had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes, eyes that Emma tried not to see too often, tried not to remember. "Is it still raining?" "Yeah, baby, still raining." Emma forced a smile, turned from the window. "You hungry? I can make pancakes. The good kind or the stretchy kind?" Emma's smile turned real for a moment. Lily had learned to distinguish between the name brand mix that made fluffy pancakes and the dollar store version that came out thin and rubbery. "Stretchy kind today, but I'll put extra syrup on them." As Lily padded to the bathroom, Emma pulled out the ancient griddle and the near-empty box of mix. She was mixing batter when her phone buzzed a text from Rachel, her only real friend in town, the waitress who'd trained her at the diner, heard Hutchins talking to Earl at breakfast. "Says he's got buyers looking at your place. Didn't want you blindsided." "Sorry." Honorable Emma's hand froze, batter dripping from the whisk. Buyers. Not just eviction then, but sale. The land would change hands, and she and Lily would be out on the street, their belongings in trash bags, starting over in a shelter or her car or whatever came next in the downward spiral of women who'd run out of options. She set down the whisk, pressed her palms against the counter, and took 3 slow breaths, the way the free counselor at the community center had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't spiral. Don't catastrophize. Just breathe and think. But thinking only led to the same dead ends. She had $247 in her checking account. Lily needed new shoes. The electric bill was overdue. The first month's rent and deposit on even the cheapest apartment in town would be $1,200. Money that might as well be $1 million for all the possibility of her scraping it together. The rain continued its steady assault on the roof, each drop another hammer blow of reality. Emma looked around the band, cramped kitchen, the peeling linoleum, the cabinet door that wouldn't close, the photograph of Lily on the first day of school, held to the refrigerator with a magnet from a pizza place that had closed down. This wasn't much, but it was theirs. And in 2 weeks, it wouldn't even be that. She finished making the pancakes in silence, her mind spinning through impossible scenarios. She could ask her ex-husband for help, but he was 3 states away and 2 years behind on child support. And the thought of hearing his voice made her stomach turn. She could apply for more assistance, but the waiting lists were months long. She could try to negotiate with Hutchins, but with what? Promises she couldn't keep? Pleas that would only embarrass them both? By the time Lily emerged, dressed in mismatched clothes she'd picked herself, Emma had composed her face into something that resembled normalcy. They ate pancakes swimming in syrup, and Emma listened to her daughter talk about the book they were reading in class, about the frog she'd seen by the creek, about how her friend Madison had invited her to a birthday party next month. "Can I go, Mama? Please. Madison's having it at the place with the trampolines. We'll see, baby. That's a long way off." Emma's throat tightened. Next month might as well be next year. Next month, they might be sleeping in the car, or in some cramped room at the women's shelter in the county seat, or on Rachel's couch if her friend's boyfriend allowed it. After breakfast, Emma sent Lily to brush her teeth and stood again at the window. The rain had finally begun to ease, the clouds thinning to reveal breaks of pale sky. The land behind the trailer stretched out in sodden green and brown, the pines swaying, the brush bending under the weight of water. 5 acres of nothing, she'd always thought. 5 acres that nobody wanted, that produced nothing, that held nothing of value. But it was all she had. And in 2 weeks, she wouldn't even have that. She watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the wind with effortless grace, and felt a stab of envy so sharp it made her eyes sting. To be free like that, unburdened, riding currents instead of fighting them. But Emma Carter wasn't a hawk. She was a single mother with a second-grade daughter and a future that looked like a cliff edge approaching fast. The call came that afternoon, while Lily was at school and Emma was scrubbing someone else's bathroom for $15 an hour. "Mr. Hutchins's voice was apologetic but firm. "Emma, I need to talk to you about the property. Can you come by the office tomorrow morning?" She knew what that meant. She agreed to 9 o'clock, hung up, and sat on the edge of her client's bathtub, staring at her reflection in the just-cleaned mirror. The woman looking back at her was too thin, too tired, too defeated. But somewhere behind those exhausted eyes was the girl who'd once believed she could make it, who'd left a bad situation because she'd had enough strength to choose herself and her daughter over a man who'd promised to kill her if she tried. That girl was still in there. She had to be, because tomorrow morning, Emma would need every ounce of that strength to face what was coming. That night, after Lily was asleep, Emma walked out into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped, leaving everything washed clean and smelling of wet earth and pine. She walked to the edge of the property, where the land sloped down toward a creek she could hear, but not see in the darkness. 5 acres of Georgia, red clay, and scrub pine. 5 acres of nothing. Except it wasn't nothing to her. It was the place where Lily had learned to catch lightning bugs, where they'd had picnics on an old blanket, where Emma had dared to imagine, for brief moments, that they might actually be okay. She stood there until the cold drove her inside, until the weight of tomorrow loomed too large to ignore. And as she climbed into bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin, If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. She made herself a promise. Whatever happened in Hutchins's office, she would hold her head high. She would not cry. She would not beg. She had lost everything before and survived. She would survive this too. But survival, she was learning, was just another word for slowly drowning. And Emma Carter was so very tired of trying to breathe. The morning came too quickly, grey and cold. Emma dropped Lily at school. Her daughter's cheerful goodbye cutting like glass against the dread coiled in her stomach. She drove the 7 miles to town in her car that rattled and wheezed, parked outside Hutchins's real estate office, and sat for 5 minutes gathering the courage to walk through the door. The office smelled like coffee and paper, the walls covered with listings for properties she would never be able to afford. Mr. Hutchins looked up when she entered, his weathered face creased with something that might have been sympathy. He was in his 70s, a man who'd farmed most of his life before, turning to real estate when his knees gave out. Emma had always liked him, which somehow made this worse. "Emma, thanks for coming." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Coffee?" "No, thank you." She sat, hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I know I'm behind. I know you've been more than patient. I just need a little more time, Emma." His voice was gentle but firm. "I can't give you more time. I've got a family ready to buy, and they're offering cash. I've got my own bills, my own situation. I've let this go on longer than I should have already." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. This was it. Then, the end of the line. "But," Hutchins continued, and something in his tone made her look up, "I wanted to give you first right of refusal. If you can match their offer $15,000 for the 5 acres, the place is yours. Free and clear, no more rent." Emma almost laughed. $15,000 might as well be 15 million. "Mr. Hutchins, I appreciate that, but I don't have that kind of money. I don't have any money. I know, and I'm sorry. I truly am." He paused, then said quietly, "You've got 2 weeks to move out. If you need help with a security deposit somewhere else, I can probably—" "No." Emma stood, her pride flaring hot and sudden. "No, thank you. We'll be fine." She was out the door, before he could say anything else, before the tears could start, before the weight of it could crush her completely. She sat in her car in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, and let herself have 60 seconds of breaking down. 60 seconds of choking sobs and shaking hands, and the kind of despair that felt like drowning. Then she wiped her face, started the car, and drove to her cleaning job. Because bills didn't care about heartbreak, and Lily needed lunch money, and Emma Carter had learned long ago that the world kept spinning whether you were ready or not. That evening, she told Lily they'd be moving soon, spinning it as an adventure, a chance to find somewhere better. Lily asked questions. Emma couldn't answer, her young face troubled in a way that made Emma's chest ache. After bedtime, Emma sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and tried to make a plan. But every plan required money she didn't have, resources she couldn't access, miracles she'd stopped believing in. The rain returned that night, hammering the trailer's tin roof, and Emma lay awake listening to it, feeling like the rain itself was trying to wash her away. She thought about calling her mother, who hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, who'd sided with the husband during the divorce. She thought about applying for more credit cards she'd never be able to pay off. She thought about options that weren't really options at all, just different shades of desperation. By morning, she'd made a decision. If she was going to lose this place anyway, she'd spend her last 2 weeks here, trying to make it better for whoever came next. Maybe they'd have better luck than she had. Maybe they'd plant that garden, and it would actually grow. Maybe they'd fill these acres with something other than broken dreams and impossible hope. It was a small act of defiance, maybe even stupid, but it was all she had left. So Emma Carter, single mother and professional survivor, decided that if she was going down, she'd go down swinging. Even if the only thing she could swing was a rake and a sense of dignity she couldn't quite afford to lose. The next few days passed in a blur of denial and motion. Emma threw herself into work extra shifts at the diner, more cleaning jobs, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spinning into the darkness that waited at the edges of her thoughts. She came home exhausted each night, helped Lily with homework, and after her daughter fell asleep, stood at the window staring out at the land that would soon belong to someone else. On the fourth day after her meeting with Hutchins, the Christians' rain finally stopped for good. The sun emerged, tentative at first, then blazing with the kind of unseasonable warmth that Georgia sometimes offered in late autumn. The land steamed, moisture rising from the red clay in ghostly wisps. Emma decided this was the day she'd start cleaning up the property. A futile gesture, maybe, but one that gave her something to control in a life that felt increasingly chaotic. She started after dropping Lily at school, pulling on her oldest jeans and a flannel shirt that had belonged to her grandfather. The work began simply enough, dragging fallen branches to a burn pile, clearing the worst of the overgrown brush near the trailer, trying to make the place look less like an abandoned lot and more like somewhere someone might actually want to live. By noon, she'd worked up a sweat, despite the cooling air. She'd cleared a path to the old property line, where a rusted fence marked the boundary she'd never bothered to explore fully. The land sloped down, here, thick with pine and scrub oak, and Emma had always assumed it was just more of the same worthless brush on worthless ground. But as she dragged another branch to the pile, she noticed something odd, a depression in the earth, about 20 feet from the fence line, where the recent rains had caused a small washout. The red clay had slumped away, revealing something that caught the afternoon light with a dull metallic gleam. Emma stopped, wiping sweat from her forehead. Probably just trash, she thought. The previous tenant had left junk scattered everywhere. Old appliances, car parts, rusted farm equipment. But curiosity pulled her forward, and she found herself kneeling at the edge of the depression, brushing away mud with her work gloves. The metal underneath was flat and smooth, not the corroded surface of abandoned machinery. She scraped more clay away, following the line of it, and her breath caught. It wasn't random debris, it was a door. A steel door, set flush into the hillside, like something from a military installation or a Cold War bunker. Emma sat back on her heels, her heart rate picking up. The door was roughly 4 feet square, its surface marked with rust and weathering but clearly built to last. Along one edge, barely visible beneath decades of grime, she could make out stenciled letters, U.S. property. Her hands were shaking as she cleared more mud away, revealing a heavy steel handle and what looked like a locking mechanism. This wasn't trash. This was something that had been deliberately buried, deliberately hidden, and deliberately sealed. For a long moment, Emma just stared at it. Common sense told her to call someone, the county, maybe, or Hutchins, or whoever you were supposed to notify when you found what might be government property on land you were about to lose. But another part of her, the part that had been beaten down and desperate for so long, whispered something different. This is on your land. For 2 more weeks, this is yours. Whatever it is, whatever's down there, you found it. You have every right to look. The rational arguments against opening it came easily. It could be dangerous, could be contaminated, could be nothing at all, and she'd be wasting time better spent packing and job hunting. But Emma Carter had spent 2 years being rational, being careful, making all the right choices, and watching them lead nowhere. For once, just once, she wanted to choose recklessness. She wanted to choose possibility over prudence. She went back to the trailer and grabbed tools, a crowbar, a hammer, WD-40 she'd used on squeaky hinges. Lily was at school for another 4 hours. She had time. She had nothing but time, really. Because what was she losing? A life that was already lost. A future that had already been foreclosed. The lock mechanism was rusted solid, and for the first 20 minutes, she thought it might be impossible. But the WD-40 worked its chemical magic, and with leverage from the crowbar, strength born of frustration, something finally gave. The lock disengaged with a metallic shriek that echoed across the empty land, and Emma felt the door shift under her hands. She hesitated then, her fingers on the steel handle. This was the moment. Open it, and whatever came next, good or bad, dangerous or empty, would become part of her story. Leave it closed, and she could walk away. Call Hutchins, let someone else make the discovery, and claim whatever reward or risk it held. But Emma had never been good at walking away from things that might hurt her. It was how she'd ended up, married at 22, pregnant at 23, divorced and running at 29. It was probably how she'd end up in trouble now, but at least it would be her trouble, her choice, her gamble. She pulled the handle. The door resisted at first, sealed by pressure and time, then gave way with a groan of protesting metal. A rush of cold, stale air escaped, carrying the smell of earth and something else, something metallic and old and utterly still. Emma stumbled back, her heart hammering, as the door swung inward to reveal a black void descending into the earth. She grabbed her phone, turned on its flashlight, and aimed the beam into the opening. A ladder, metal rungs leading down into darkness. The walls around it were poured concrete, smooth and professional, not the rough work of some homesteader's root cellar. This was military-grade construction, built to last, built to be forgotten. What the hell were you hiding out here? Emma whispered to the Georgia dirt, to the government men who'd buried this thing decades ago, to whatever history had been sealed beneath her feet. There was only one way to find out. She tested the first rung with her weight. It held. The second, the third, and before she could talk herself out of it, Emma Carter descended into the dark, her phone's light bouncing off concrete walls, her breath coming fast and shallow, every instinct screaming that this was crazy, even as her feet kept moving down, 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 into the buried unknown. The ladder descended about 15 feet before her boots hit solid floor. Emma stood in the darkness, her phone's flashlight cutting a pale cone through the black. The air was cold and dead, unmoving, carrying that peculiar smell of spaces, long-sealed dust and metal, and something chemical that made her nose wrinkle. She swung the light around slowly, trying to make sense of the space. She was standing in a corridor, about 6 feet wide, with poured concrete walls and a ceiling just high enough for her to stand upright. The floor was covered in gritty dust, and her footprints showed clearly in it the first marks here in who knew how many years. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice flat and strange in the dead air. "Okay, you're down here. Now what?" The corridor stretched ahead about 20 feet before ending at another door. This one painted a faded military green. Emma moved toward it, her phone, light revealing details as she walked. Conduit running along the ceiling, brackets on the walls, where something had once been mounted, a stenciled warning that had faded to illegibility. The green door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped into a larger chamber. Her phone light swept across what was clearly a former living space, or maybe a workspace. Metal shelves lined one wall, mostly empty but holding a few items that made her pulse quicken. Sealed plastic containers, what looked like old radio equipment, and stacks of papers in weather-tight boxes. Against another wall stood a metal desk, its surface clear except for a thick layer of dust. In the corner, she spotted what might have been sleeping quarters, a metal frame that had once held a cot, now just bare springs. Emma moved to the shelves first, her hands shaking as she pulled down one of the sealed containers. Inside were documents, their edges yellowed, but the paper still intact. She pulled out the first page and her phone light caught typed text. "Classified," stamped across the top in faded red ink, followed by a date that made her stomach drop. 1962. "What the hell is this?" She flipped through more pages, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Technical specifications, chemical formulas, references to something called Project Sage. And then, buried in the middle of the stack, a different kind of document, a financial ledger. Its columns filled with numbers that made her hands go numb. Account transfers, Swiss bank account numbers, dollar amounts preceded by so many zeros she had to count them twice to believe what she was seeing. Emma set the papers down on the desk, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She pulled out more containers, opened more boxes. Each one held more documents, research papers, technical specifications, what looked like blueprints for facilities in multiple locations, and threaded through it all, like a golden thread she couldn't quite follow, were references to money. Money moved, money hidden, money that had been skimmed or stolen or diverted for purposes the documents never quite spelled out. She found the photographs almost by accident, tucked into a metal box that had fallen behind one of the shelves. Black and white images of men in military uniforms standing beside equipment she couldn't identify. Men in civilian clothes shaking hands outside buildings that looked governmental. And in one photo, dated 1963, a group shot that included someone who looked hauntingly like a younger version of Mr. Hutchins's father. She'd seen the old man's portrait hanging in the real estate office. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Oh my God," Emma breathed. Her phone battery was at 34%. She'd been down here for 40 minutes, and Lily got out of school in less than 2 hours. But she couldn't stop now. She had to understand what she'd found. She moved to the desk and started opening drawers. Most were empty or held useless debris, dried-up pens, moldering notebooks, administrative forms too faded to read. But the bottom drawer stuck, and when she finally yanked it free, she found something that stopped her cold. A small metal strongbox, about the size of a shoebox. Its lock long since rusted away. Emma pried it open, and her phone light caught the gleam of gold. Coins, dozens of them, each one stamped with dates from the early 1960 seconds. American gold eagles, if she remembered her basic coin knowledge correctly. And beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them perfectly, were bearer bonds, the kind she'd only heard about in movies, the kind that were as good as cash to whoever held them. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the box. She forced herself to breathe, to think. This was real. This wasn't some prank or imagination. She had just found what? A government installation? A hiding place for something illegal? A Cold War time capsule that someone had meant to come back for and never did. And more importantly, was any of this legally hers? Emma's mind raced through possibilities. The land was rented, but Hutchins had said she had 2 weeks before he finalized the sale. The documents said U.S. property, but they were decades old, classified material that had clearly been buried and forgotten. The coins and bonds had no names attached. They were bearer instruments, meant to be owned by whoever possessed them. She looked at her phone. 28% battery. An hour and 15 minutes until school pickup. She needed to get out of here. Needed to think. Needed to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do with this discovery that felt too big, too impossible, too much like the kind of luck that came with strings attached. But first, she needed proof. Evidence. Something to show this was real before the land sale went through and someone else claimed whatever legal rights might exist to this underground secret. Emma worked quickly, her photographer's instinct from her long-ago college days kicking in. She photographed the documents page after page, making sure the classified stamps were visible, making sure the dates and account numbers were clear. She photographed the coins, the bonds, the equipment. She photographed the space itself, establishing the location, the construction, the evidence that this had been a military or government installation. By the time her phone battery hit 15%, she had over 200 photos. She carefully placed the strongbox with the coins and bonds back where she'd found it, then grabbed one of the document containers, the one with the financial ledgers, and tucked it under her arm. Physical evidence, just in case the photos weren't enough. She climbed back up the ladder, her muscles shaking from adrenaline as much as exertion. The afternoon sun was bright after the darkness below, and Emma stood blinking in it, the container clutched to her chest, her mind spinning with implications she couldn't quite process. She sealed the door as best she could, covering it with brush and making it look undisturbed. Whatever came next, she needed time to think. Time to understand what she'd found. Time to figure out if this was a miracle or a curse, salvation, or just another kind of trap. Emma checked her phone. 23 minutes until school pickup. She had just enough time to hide the document container in her car, wash her face, and compose herself enough that Lily wouldn't ask too many questions about why her mother looked like she'd seen a ghost. Because that's what this felt like she'd disturbed ghosts. Cold War ghosts, government secrets, buried treasure that carried the weight of history and implications she couldn't begin to untangle. As she walked back to the trailer, her legs weak and her mind reeling, Emma Carter made a decision. Tomorrow morning, first thing, she would call someone who might understand what she'd found. Not Hutchins, not yet. Not until she knew whether this discovery meant anything legally. Not the police. She had a deep mistrust of authority figures that came from experience. But someone who would know, who could advise her, who might help her understand if what she'd found was worth fighting for, or if it was just another beautiful, impossible thing that would slip through her fingers like everything else. She cleaned up quickly, changed clothes, and drove to the school with 5 minutes to spare. When Lily bounced out, chattering about her day, Emma hugged her daughter tight enough to make the girl squirm and laugh. "Mom, you're squishing me." "Sorry, baby. Just happy to see you." That night, after Lily was asleep, Emma sat at the kitchen table with the document container open in front of her. She read through the financial ledgers again, trying to make sense of the numbers. Millions of dollars, moved through accounts decades ago. Research funding that had been diverted, apparently without oversight. Projects that referenced other projects, creating a web of activity that pointed to something bigger than a simple buried bunker. And then, on the last page of one ledger, she found a name that made her blood run cold. Hutchins Development Corporation. Listed as a contractor, paid substantial sums for land acquisition services between 1961 and 1964. Emma leaned back in her chair, her mind making connections she didn't want to make. Hutchins's father had been involved in whatever project had created that bunker, which meant Hutchins himself might know about it, might have been waiting for decades to reclaim what his father had helped hide, which meant that the sudden interest in selling her property, the buyers, who were supposedly ready with cash, might not be coincidence at all. She thought about the 2 weeks he'd given her, time enough for her to give up and leave before the sale closed, time enough for whoever knew the truth, to make sure that she never found what was buried beneath her feet. "Too late," Emma whispered to the empty kitchen. "I already found it." The question now was what to do about it, and whether the thing she'd found would save her or destroy her. Because Emma Carter had lived long enough to know that treasures came in many forms, and not all of them were worth their cost. But sitting in that trailer at midnight, with her daughter sleeping in the next room, and eviction notices piled on the counter, Emma made a choice. She would fight, not because she thought she'd win. She'd lost enough to know that happy endings were rare and usually reserved for other people, but because for once in her life, she'd found something that might change everything, and she'd be damned if she'd walk away without at least trying to understand what that meant. Tomorrow, she would call a lawyer. Tomorrow, she would start fighting back. Tonight, she would let herself believe, just for a few hours, that maybe luck hadn't abandoned her completely, that maybe the universe had buried something precious under her feet and waited for the exact moment when she needed it most to let the rain wash it clean. Emma fell asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms. The financial ledgers spread around her like a paper shield against a world that had never been kind. And in her dreams, she descended that ladder again. But this time the darkness at the bottom held not secrets but light, bright and blinding, and impossible to look away from. The next morning began with a phone call. Emma had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. She'd found the number online after midnight, lying awake and Googling combinations of Cold War bunkers, government property, and finders' rights, until her eyes burned. The law firm specialized in unusual property cases, and their consultation fee was more than she could afford, but less than she feared. "Miss Carter, let me make sure I understand." David Chen's voice was measured. "Professional, you've discovered what appears to be a Cold War-era government installation on property you're currently renting?" "Yes." Emma pressed the phone tighter to her ear, standing at the trailer window while Lily ate cereal at the table behind her. "It was buried. The recent rains exposed part of the door. I didn't know it was there." "And you've documented what you found?" "Photos. Lots of photos. And I took one container of documents, financial records mostly. Everything else is still down there." There was a pause. Emma could hear the scratch of pen on paper. "Miss Carter, I need to be very clear with you about something. What you're describing could fall under several different legal frameworks, and not all of them work in your favor. If this is genuinely classified government property, there are protocols. The documents are from 1962, Emma interrupted. "Wouldn't they be declassified by now?" "Possibly, but that's not really the issue. The issue is whether the government, and more accurately, whatever agency created that installation, still maintains claim to the site and its contents, and whether your landlord was aware of its existence." Emma's stomach tightened. "Why would my landlord being aware matter?" "Because if he knew about it and didn't disclose it, that could constitute fraud in your rental agreement. But if he didn't know, and it's determined the site legally belongs to the government, then neither of you has claim to it." Chen paused. "However, there are precedents for finders' rights, especially with bearer bonds and precious metals found on property where the original owner has abandoned claim or cannot be located. So what do I do? First, don't touch anything else down there. You've potentially already committed a crime by removing documents, even if they're decades old. Handling classified material without clearance is a federal offense. Second, we need to establish a legal record of your discovery before the property sale goes through. If you have 2 weeks, we need to file a claim immediately." "A claim?" Emma's hand was shaking. "I can't afford. I'll take this on contingency," Chen said quietly. "If there's genuinely gold coins and bearer bonds down there, Miss Carter, we're talking about potentially significant value. If it's legitimate, if we can establish legal claim, my fee comes from the proceeds. If we lose, you owe nothing." "Why would you do that?" She could hear the smile in his voice. "Because cases like this are rare and interesting, and because I grew up poor enough to recognize desperation when I hear it. Send me the photos. All of them. I'll review them today and call you tonight with next steps." After she hung up, Emma stood frozen at the window for a long moment. Lily's voice broke through. "Mama, are we really moving?" Emma turned, forcing a smile. "Maybe. Maybe not. I'm working on something that might help. Is it a good something or a bad something? I don't know yet, baby. But I promise I'll figure it out." At the diner that afternoon, Rachel cornered her during their break. "You look like you haven't slept in a week. What's going on?" Emma wanted to tell her, wanted to share the secret that felt too big to carry alone. But something held her back. Not distrust, exactly, but caution, the same instinct that had made her check the documents for references to Hutchins, the same wariness that came from years of learning that people she trusted could hurt her. "Just stressed about the move," Emma said. "Trying to figure out options. Rachel studied her with the kind of look that said she didn't believe it, but wouldn't push. You know, Earl's brother has a rental house opening up next month. It's not much, but it's cheap. And he might work with you on deposit. Thanks. I'll think about it. But Emma knew she wouldn't take it. Couldn't take it. Not now. Not when she'd found something that might change everything. She just needed time. Time to understand what she'd do, Earl discovered. Time to establish legal claim. Time to figure out if the treasure buried beneath her feet was real, or just another cruel trick of circumstance. That evening, Chen called back. His voice carried an excitement he was clearly trying to contain. Miss Carter, I've reviewed your photos. What you've found is extraordinary. The documents alone would be significant from a historical standpoint, but the financial records, if they're accurate, suggest systematic diversion of government funds over multiple years. The coins appear to be authentic American gold eagles from the early 1962, and the bearer bonds, if they're legitimate, would be worth millions even before accounting for interest. Emma's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the couch. Millions? Potentially. Bearer bonds from that era, properly validated, can be worth their face value plus decades of accumulated interest. But, and this is important, there are significant hurdles. First, we need to verify authenticity. Second, we need to establish that they weren't reported stolen. Third, we need to prove legal finder's rights before your lease expires. How do we do that? We file an emergency motion tomorrow morning. We're going to claim that the installation represents abandoned property, that your landlord failed to disclose its existence, and that you have legitimate finder's rights to its contents. It's going to get messy, Miss Carter. Your landlord will fight it. If word gets out, and it will, you may have government agencies getting involved. You need to be prepared for that. Prepared how? Prepared for your life to get complicated very quickly. Prepared for attention you might not want. Prepared for the possibility that we'll fight hard and still lose. He paused. But also prepared for the possibility that we'll win. That you'll walk away from this with enough money to change your life completely. After they hung up, Emma sat in the darkness of the trailer, listening to Lily's soft breathing from the bedroom. Change her life completely. The words echoed like a prayer and a threat. She'd spent so long just trying to survive that the idea of actually thriving felt foreign, dangerous, like hoping for something too big would jinx it. But she couldn't stop herself from imagining it. A real house, not a leaking trailer. Lily in a good school, with new clothes and birthday parties, and a childhood that didn't include food banks and eviction notices. Emma herself, going back to school maybe, or starting the photography business she'd dreamed about, before life had gotten in the way. Security, stability, the kind of boring, beautiful normal that she'd stopped believing was possible for people like her. Don't, she whispered to herself, don't hope, not yet. But hope was already there, small and stubborn, taking root despite her best efforts to kill it. The next 3 days were a blur of activity that felt both glacially slow and terrifyingly fast. Chen filed the emergency motion, and suddenly Emma found herself at the center of a legal storm she barely understood. Hutchins called, his voice tight with anger, demanding to know what was going on. Emma, following Chen's advice, said only that she'd discovered something on the property that required legal clarification before any sale could proceed. "You're trying to hold me up," Hutchins said. His previous kindness evaporated. "You think you found something valuable, and now you want a piece of it." "I just want what's legally mine," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "That property isn't yours. The lease expires in 10 days, and then you're trespassing. Not if the court grants my motion." The silence that followed was heavy. When Hutchins spoke again, his tone had changed, less anger, more calculation. "Whatever you found, Emma, it's not going to work out how you think. There are things about that land you don't understand. Then help me understand. Talk to your lawyer," he said, and hung up. That night, Emma went back to the bunker. She knew Chen had told her not to, knew she was risking her case by potentially contaminating evidence, but she needed to see it again, needed to convince herself it was real. She descended the ladder with a better flashlight this time, and the space felt both more and less threatening in the stronger beam. She walked through the chambers slowly, noticing details she'd missed in her first frantic exploration. A calendar on one wall, frozen at October 1963, a logbook on the desk, its entries suddenly stopping mid-sentence. Personal effects. In a footlocker, clothes, toiletries. A paperback novel with pages yellowed but still readable. Someone had lived here, worked here. And then, for reasons the bunker didn't explain, they'd left in a hurry and never come back. The equipment, the documents, the coins and bonds, all abandoned as if the occupant had planned to return and simply never did. Emma found something else. On that second visit, a smaller chamber she'd missed before. Hidden behind a door she'd thought was a closet. Inside was more equipment, sophisticated radio gear that looked military, and a locked safe built into the concrete wall. She didn't try to open it. Instead, she photographed it, documenting its existence for Chen. When she climbed back up, the night sky was clear and cold, stars bright against the darkness. Emma stood on the land that had been nothing but a burden for 2 years, and felt its weight shift. This place had secrets. Whether those secrets would save her or condemn her, she still didn't know. But they were hers now, for better or worse. The court hearing was set for the following Monday, 4 days before her lease expired. Chen had warned her it would be preliminary, just to establish standing for a longer legal fight. But Emma understood what he wasn't saying. If they didn't win this first battle, there wouldn't be a longer fight. She'd lose the property, lose access to the bunker, and lose any chance at claiming what might be inside. That weekend, Emma did something she hadn't done in years. She went to church. Not the big one in town where everyone knew everyone's business, but a small chapel on the edge of the county where Lily had been invited once by a school friend. They sat in the back, and Emma didn't really listen to the sermon. She just sat in the quiet, her daughter's small hand in hers, and tried to find some kind of peace with whatever came next. On the way out, an older woman stopped them. "You look troubled, dear." Emma almost laughed at the understatement. "Just going through a hard time." "I'll pray for you," the woman said, and Emma surprised herself by thanking her. That night, tucking Lily into bed, her daughter asked the question Emma had been dreading. "Mama, if we have to move, can we take my nightlight and my stuffed turtle?" "Baby, of course. We'll take everything that matters. What if the new place doesn't have a window where I can see the stars?" Emma's throat tightened. "Then we'll find a way to make new windows. We'll make it work. I promise." "Okay." Lily yawned, already half asleep. "I love you, Mama. I love you more than all the stars." After Lily drifted off, Emma stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep. This was what mattered. Not the bunker, not the treasure, not the legal fight. This child, this bright, beautiful girl, who'd done nothing to deserve a life of instability and struggle. Whatever Emma had to do to give Lily something better, she'd do it. Even if it meant fighting the government. Even if it meant facing down men who'd buried secrets decades ago and didn't want them found. Even if it meant risking everything on a desperate gamble that would probably fail. But maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't fail. Maybe, for once, Emma Carter's luck had finally turned. Maybe the universe had buried treasure beneath her feet and marked it with rain and desperation, waiting for the exact moment when she was ready to find it. Monday morning came too fast and too slow. Emma, dressed in her one nice outfit, pants and a blouse she wore to parent-teacher conferences, and drove to the county courthouse with Chen meeting her there. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. "Remember," Chen said as they walked up the courthouse steps, "this is just preliminary. We're establishing standing. Whatever happens today, the real fight comes later. What are our chances? He looked at her with a lawyer's careful honesty. Better than they were. Worse than I'd like. Your landlord has brought in serious representation. The kind you hire when you've got something to hide. They walked into the courtroom, and Emma saw Hutchins sitting on the other side with two lawyers in expensive suits. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence, and in that studied avoidance, Emma saw something that made her spine straighten. He was afraid. Not of her, maybe, but of what she'd found. Which meant Chen was right. There were secrets buried out there that people had worked very hard to keep hidden. The hearing began. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for bullshit, listened to both sides present their cases. Chen argued that Emma had discovered abandoned property, that Hutchins had failed to disclose the installation's existence, and that finder's rights applied. Hutchins's lawyers argued that the lease was expiring, that any discovery on the property belonged to the landowner, and that government property couldn't be claimed through finder's rights. Back and forth, legal arguments that Emma only half understood. Words like adverse possession and abandoned chattel and federal jurisdiction, flying between the attorneys like weapons. And then the judge did something unexpected. She called a recess and requested to see the photographic evidence in her chambers. Just her, the attorneys, and Emma. No, Hutchins. In the judge's chambers, Chen presented the photos on his laptop, clear images of the documents, the coins, the bonds, the classified stamps, the financial records showing Hutchins Development Corporation. The judge studied them in silence for a long time. Finally, she looked up at Emma. "Miss Carter, do you understand what you found?" "I think so, Your Honor. A Cold War installation with documents and valuables that someone left behind. And you have no idea why your landlord didn't disclose its existence." Emma glanced at Hutchins's lawyers, then back at the judge. "I have theories." The judge's lips quirked almost into a smile. "I'm sure you do." She closed the laptop. "I'm going to grant your motion for standing. The lease is suspended pending full investigation of the property and its contents. You may remain on the premises, Miss Carter, but you are not to remove anything further without court approval. The property will be surveyed by neutral experts, and we will reconvene in 30 days to review their findings." One of Hutchins's lawyers started to object, but the judge held up a hand. "I've seen enough to know this isn't a simple landlord-tenant dispute. There are historical and potentially criminal implications that need to be properly investigated. My ruling stands." Emma walked out of the courthouse in a daze. Chen was grinning. "That was better than I hoped. The judge basically just gave you 30 more days and put the burden on Hutchins to prove his case. What happens in 30 days? We find out if those bonds are real, if the coins are authentic, and if anyone else has legal claim to them. But for now," he clapped her shoulder, "for now, you just bought yourself some time. Use it wisely." That night, Emma told Lily they weren't moving after all, at least not right away. Lily's face lit up with relief so pure it made Emma's eyes sting. They celebrated with pizza Emma couldn't afford, and for the first time in months, she let herself relax. Just a little. Just enough to breathe. But Emma Carter had learned not to trust moments of peace. They were usually the calm before worse storms. And as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't shake the memory of Hutchins's face in the courtroom, the careful blankness that barely covered something darker. Whatever secrets were buried on her land, people had killed to protect them before. Emma would be a fool to think they wouldn't try again now. She just hadn't expected them to come for her so soon. The first sign came 3 days after the hearing. Emma returned from her shift at the diner to find her trailer door ajar. The lock jimmied but not broken. Nothing obvious was missing. TV still there. Lily's tablet, Emma's laptop. But someone had been inside, had gone through her things with enough care to almost hide it. Almost But Emma had grown up in homes where you learned to notice when things were moved. The papers she'd taken from the bunker, the ones she'd hidden in a locked box under her bed, were still there. But the box had been opened. Not forced, but picked, then carefully closed again, as if someone wanted her to know they'd found them. The message was clear. We know what you have. We can get to it whenever we want. Back off. Emma called Chen immediately, her voice shaking with anger more than fear. He told her to file a police report, to document everything, to install cameras. She did all of it, but she knew the police report wouldn't matter. Whoever had come had been professional enough to leave no evidence. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in Lily's room with her grandfather's old baseball bat across her lap, watching the door, listening to every creak and whisper of the trailer settling. When dawn finally came, she was exhausted and wired, running on adrenaline and terrible coffee. Rachel noticed at work, pulled her aside during their break and said, "You look like hell. What's really going on?" Emma almost told her. Almost spilled everything: the bunker, the treasure, the threat that hung over her like a knife. But something in her hesitated. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Just having trouble sleeping, she said. Stress. But that afternoon, when she picked up Lily from school, Emma noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the same one she'd seen yesterday and the day before, not following her exactly, just present, a reminder. She took a different route home, her hands tight on the steering wheel. Lily chattered about her day. Oblivious. Emma tried to focus on her daughter's voice, to find comfort in the normal. But normal had become a memory. That evening, Chen called with news. The initial assessment is back from the coin expert. Emma, they're authentic. The gold coins alone are worth close to $200,000 at current prices. Emma's breath caught. 200. And that's not counting the bearer bonds. We're still working on authentication for those. But if they're genuine, we're talking about potentially $3 to $5 million depending on accrued interest. The number was so big, it didn't feel real. 5 million. The kind of money that appeared in movies, not in the lives of single mothers scraping by in rural Georgia. There's a problem though, Chen continued, his voice careful. The government has taken an interest. Someone at the State Department got wind of the classified documents, and they're claiming the entire site falls under federal jurisdiction. Can they do that? They can try. But here's the thing, those documents were abandoned decades ago. The site was never properly decommissioned. There's no record of it in any federal database, which means we have a strong argument that it was forgotten, abandoned, and therefore fair game for finders' rights. What about Hutchins? Does he know about the coin valuation? Not officially, but I'd assume he has sources. Chen paused. Emma, you need to be careful. The money involved here is substantial. People do desperate things for much less. After they hung up, Emma stood at the trailer window staring out at the land. 5 million. The words wouldn't compute. She thought about what it would mean: a real house. College for Lily. Security for the first time in her life. No more double shifts. No more choosing between electricity and groceries. A cushion against disaster, instead of living one crisis away from homelessness. But she also thought about the black sedan, the broken lock on her door, the way Hutchins's lawyers had looked at her in court. Not like she was an opponent, but like she was an obstacle to be removed. Mama? Lily appeared at her elbow. Are you okay? Emma pulled her daughter close. Yeah, baby. I'm okay. Just thinking. About what? About danger. About choices. About whether treasure was worth dying for. But Emma said, about how much I love you. Gross, Lily said, but she was smiling. That night, Emma made a decision. She would see this through, would fight for what she'd found, for the future it promised. But she wouldn't be stupid about it. She called her mother for the first time in 3 years, swallowing her pride in a single bitter gulp. Mom? It's Emma. Silence. Then, What do you want? I need you to take Lily for a few weeks. Just until something I'm dealing with gets resolved. What kind of something? Emma closed her eyes. The kind I don't want my daughter around for. Please. I know we're not. I know things aren't good between us. But she's your granddaughter. Keep her safe for me. Another pause. Then, grudgingly, fine. When? I'll bring her this weekend. After the call ended, Emma felt something loosen in her chest. Lily wouldn't be happy about it, would argue and complain, and maybe not forgive her mother for a while. But she'd be safe, away from whatever was coming. Because Emma could feel it in her bones, something was coming. The broken lock had been a warning. The next move wouldn't be so gentle. She spent Friday packing Lily's things, spinning stories about a fun visit with Grandma, about how they'd see each other again soon. Lily cried when she realized Emma wasn't staying, clung to her mother at the door of her grandmother's house 3 hours away, begging not to be left. It's just for a little while, Emma promised, her own eyes burning. I'll call every day. I promise. You promise? Promise? Promise, promise. The drive back to the trailer felt endless. Emma kept checking her rearview mirror, but no one followed her. The black sedan was gone, or at least invisible now. She arrived home after dark, the trailer feeling cavernous and wrong without Lily's presence. Chen had advised her to stay somewhere else, to not be predictable, but Emma refused to be driven from the only home she had. This was her land, or would be, if they won. She wouldn't surrender it to fear. She installed the security cameras she'd bought, positioned them to cover the door and windows. She checked the locks twice, 3 times. She put the baseball bat by her bed and her phone on the nightstand, Chen's number on speed dial. And then she waited. The attack came at 2 a.m., not dramatic, not violent, but terrifyingly quiet. Emma woke to the smell of gasoline, her mind sluggish with sleep. It took precious seconds to understand, to realize what the scent meant, to stumble from bed and see the orange glow outside her window. Fire. Someone had set a fire at the base of the trailer's propane tank. Emma didn't think, didn't grab belongings or documents. She just ran, bursting through the door in her pajamas, bare feet on cold ground. The flames were still small, contained to a pile of rags and kindling someone had stacked against the tank. But the propane, she grabbed the garden hose, twisted the spigot, and sprayed water at the base of the flames. The fire hissed and spat, smoke billowing. Emma kept spraying, her hands shaking, her breath coming in gasps, until the flames finally died. Only then did she allow herself to collapse on the ground, the hose still running in her hands. She sat there in the mud and darkness, shaking, until her phone rang. Chen's voice. Emma, the security company just called me. Your camera's triggered. Are you okay? Someone just tried to burn down my home, she said, her voice flat with shock. They tried to kill me. I'm calling the police. Don't move. Don't touch anything. But Emma was already on her feet, already walking toward the bunker location with her phone's flashlight. If someone wanted her gone badly enough to commit arson, they weren't going to stop, which meant she needed leverage, needed evidence so damning, so public, that hurting her would cost more than leaving her alone. She descended the ladder one more time, her heart hammering. This time, she didn't hesitate at the safe. She used the crowbar she'd left down there and worked at it until the old lock gave way. Inside was what she'd hoped for. More documents, more bearer bonds, and something else. A journal, handwritten, its pages filled with neat entries dating back to 1962. Emma grabbed it all, stuffed the journal and bonds into her shirt, grabbed handfuls of the most incriminating documents. She'd promised not to remove anything else, but that was before someone tried to kill her. All bets were off now. She climbed back up, hauled everything to her car, and locked it in the trunk. By the time the police arrived, she was sitting on the trailer's steps, covered in soot and mud, the smell of gasoline still thick in the air. The officers took her statement, photographed the scene, collected evidence. But Emma could see it in their faces. This was a small county, and arson investigations took resources they didn't have. Unless she died, this would go nowhere. "Is there somewhere else you can stay?" one officer asked. "Family? Friends?" Emma almost laughed. Family was 3 hours away with her daughter. Friends were people who couldn't help her even if she asked. "I'll be fine." Chen arrived just as the police were leaving. He took one look at her and said, "Pack a bag. You're coming to my house. My wife's a lawyer too. We've got security, cameras, dogs. You're not staying here alone." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence, but she was so tired, so bone-deep exhausted. She nodded. While Chen waited in his car, Emma went inside and grabbed essentials clothes, toiletries, Lily's stuffed turtle that she couldn't bear to leave behind. The trailer looked small and pathetic in the pre-dawn light, its walls thin, its protection meaningless against people determined to hurt her. She locked the door, pointless now, but habit died hard, and walked to Chen's car. As they drove away, Emma looked back once. The trailer sat quiet, the bunker hidden somewhere in the darkness behind it. Tomorrow, the assessors would come, would catalogue everything, would begin the process of determining ownership. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. But, tonight, Emma had survived, had fought back, had refused to run, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The weeks that followed blurred together in a series of legal motions, expert testimonies, and escalating threats that Chen's security system documented with clinical precision. Emma lived in her lawyer's guest room, called Lily every night, and watched as her case became something bigger than herself. The media picked up the story, "Single mother discovers Cold War treasure," and suddenly Emma was fielding interview requests, dodging reporters, becoming a symbol of something she didn't fully understand. The little guy fighting against government secrets. The underdog who might actually win. The bearer bonds were authenticated. $4.2 million, with another $800,000 in gold coins. The journal Emma had taken from the safe turned out to be crucial evidence. Detailed logs of money laundering, illegal research, government officials who diverted funds into private accounts. One of those officials had been Hutchins's father. The courtroom drama played out over 6 weeks. Government lawyers argued national security. Hutchins's team argued property rights. Chen argued finders' rights and abandonment, pointing to decades of negligence and the illegal activity the bunker had been built to hide. In the end, the judge's ruling shocked everyone. The property was used for illegal purposes. The bunker and its contents represent abandoned assets from criminal activity. The federal government's claim is voided by its own agents' misconduct. The landowner's claim is voided by failure to disclose and potential complicity. By process of elimination and established finders' rights precedent, the court awards 85% of the liquid assets to Miss Carter, with 15% held for potential additional claimants who may come forward within the next 5 years. Emma sat in stunned silence as Chen calculated numbers beside her. After legal fees and taxes, she'd walk away with approximately $3.1 million. It was Hutchins's face she remembered, most from that day, the way it crumbled, from confidence to disbelief to rage so pure it scared her. Security had to escort him from the courtroom as he shouted about appeals, about injustice, about how Emma had stolen what was rightfully his. But she hadn't stolen anything. She'd just found something that no one else had been brave enough to look for. 3 months later, Emma stood in the doorway of a real house, not huge, not fancy, but solid and safe and completely hers. Lily was running through rooms, shouting about which one would be hers, about the backyard that had a swing set, about the neighborhood kids she'd already met. Rachel had helped with the move, marveling at the transformation. "You did it. You actually did it." "I got lucky," Emma said, but even she didn't quite believe it anymore. Luck was part of it, sure, but so was stubbornness. So was refusing to accept that her life had to stay small. She'd bought the house with cash, had paid off every debt, had set up college funds for Lily, had started the photography business she'd dreamed about, and she'd done something else, donated $500,000 to organizations helping single mothers, funding that would go to women trapped in situations like the ones she'd escaped from. Because Emma Carter understood something now that she hadn't before. Treasure came in many forms. Sometimes it was gold. Sometimes it was a chance to start over. Sometimes it was just the knowledge that you'd stood up to the people who wanted to keep you down, and you'd won. That night, after Lily was asleep in her new room, Emma sat on the porch of her new house and thought about the bunker, still buried on land that Hutchins had been forced to sell to a conservation trust. The trailer was gone, hauled away. The land would return to Forrest, but the story would remain. The single mother who'd found a fortune buried in Georgia clay, who'd fought the government and a corrupt landlord, and won. Who'd proven that sometimes, when you had nothing left to lose, you could risk everything for a chance at something better. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, sent from the room upstairs. "I love my new house. You're the best mama ever." Emma smiled, tears prickling her eyes. She typed back, "I love you more than all the stars, baby." And for the first time in years, maybe ever, Emma Carter felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. The kind that came not from having everything figured out, but from knowing you'd survived the worst and came out stronger. The kind that came from digging through darkness and finding light. The rain had washed away the soil. The land had given up its secrets. And Emma had done what she'd always done. She'd survived, she'd fought, and she'd protected her daughter. Only this time, she'd won. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.